Hello. Man, it won't come out. You'll have to forgive me if I ramble a bit. I came up with this kind of on the fly. I hadn't intended to tell a story tonight, but Corin was falsely selling the idea that there weren't enough storytellers. So, yeah. So, the great untold stories of the South are those of the poor and the marginalized. My great-grandmother was born in 1895 in Lineville, Alabama, which I've never been to, and I'm not entirely sure exists. I've never actually been able to find it on the map. But she was born the daughter of a sharecropper. There were white sharecroppers, too. In fact, the rich white elite could be rather equal opportunity in who they wanted to strip the dignity and livelihood from. I suppose the only advantage of being a white sharecropper is that you were probably not going to be murdered by random mobs. But, you know, like most anybody in that environment, she wanted a way out. And at some point, my great-grandfather rolled along, a man whose last name I do not know, whose first name I do not know. His last name was Treadwell, and that was the only name by which my great-grandmother ever referred to him by, usually followed by spitting. And I guess that was the way to exert what little power, a woman had in those days, was to not grant him the dignity of a first name with any of the family that followed after his children. He was apparently a bit of a rolling stone, and after some years, he rolled out of town one day and he never came back. So my great-grandmother was left with 4 children to raise, no prospects, no education, no nothing. So in the early 1920s, which was not a good period to be in the South, the Depression came quite early to the South, or at least we got the prequel. In the 1920s, it was pretty much just sustenance farming and abject poverty outside the major cities. So she traveled from central Alabama up to Birmingham, try to find a job living in the upstairs room of a building downtown that had neither water nor indoor plumbing. Not that that was a particularly big issue to her, since she had never lived in a home with running water or indoor plumbing. But she was a remarkably personable woman, and she managed to land a job with Southern Bell, the phone company, where she worked her way up and became the first female telephone operator in the state of Alabama. Which sounds a little odd, because if you grew up when I grew up, telephone operators were pretty much exclusively female. But back in the day, that was apparently considered way too difficult and complex a job for a woman. So telephone operators and switchboard operators were male, almost exclusively. My great-grandmother actually broke a little bit of a glass ceiling that she never realized that she did. So she was able to raise her children, all of whom went on to successful lives. My great-uncle Bruce did 2 tours in Vietnam. My grandmother is another story for another day. But after World War II, my grandfather owned a construction company. He built a lot here in Macon, Henderson Stadium downtown, most of what's now Southwest High School. And he also got a government contract after the war to build public housing. And the public housing then was pretty much just the newer version at the time of what public housing still is now. It was not nice. It was cinder block construction thrown together, slapdash. But my grandmother made him promise that the one he built in Phoenix City, Alabama, which is where my great-grandmother lived, that she would be reserved an apartment. A one-room apartment. It was the first place she had ever lived that had a running water and an indoor bathroom. She loved that place. She lived in it proudly until the day she died. And it was it wasn't much. I mean, I didn't go to Phoenix City to see her more than once or twice because Phoenix City is a little too close to Auburn University for this Georgia fan. But she was just proud to have gotten just that. I mean, her wants were simple. Even after she'd gone completely blind, she refused to go into assisted living. She had memorized that little apartment so well, she knew where everything was. By heart, she could see it in her mind, even though she could no longer see it with her eyes. And she lived there quite happily until she died at the age of 95. But I guess when we think about our heritage, it's not, that my ancestor was, King Henry VIII, or that my ancestor was, this, that, and the other. If I discovered through Ancestry.com that it's somewhere along the line way back, I don't know how they would be able to confirm this, that I'm a descendant of the Emperor Charlemagne. I haven't done as well. But it's the little people who just carry on that make heritage, that make community, that make culture, is everyday people just carrying on. Again, I'm sorry this was a little disjointed. Like I said, I threw it together on the fly, but that's my story for the evening.